Greetings everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and we're finally going to resume our series on the Quick Rui. So we were up to episode 25, that's a continuation of the Neo-Archangelsk variation, and this is going to be the conclusion of the little mini-series on the Neo-Archangelsk, the third. So this is the third show on that, and the sixth show, I think, on the Archangelsk complex in general. So let's go ahead and begin here. So, of course, this is the Rui, in case you didn't already know that or missed the first 24 shows. And from here, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, b5, bishop to b3. And as you recall, the regular old-fashioned Archangelsk sees bishop to b7, after which my recommendation was for the move d3, which I think probably gives white a little bit of a pull. So bishop to c5, delaying the choice of what to do with the bishop on c8 is the Neo-Archangelsk. Not sure how to pronounce his name exactly. Tkachiev is how it looks. So he's a big exponent of this. Vladimir Malanyuk is another. Alexander Onishuk is still another. So these guys were pioneers, I would say. Now, Shirov is perhaps the best known player to use this. He's played it maybe dozens of times over the past decade and a half at least. And nowadays Fabiano Caruana is the primary, certainly the highest rated exponent of the variation. Alright, so we've discussed this already in a couple of shows. I'll just mention here, might be partially by way of recap. So the move we're going to look at here, maybe the most accurate move order, is a4. Certainly it's the most forceful move order. Now, if black plays bishop to b7 against this, we play d3. So rook to b8 is the way to go. For black, and I'll keep going from here, and then I'll go back to the position before a4 and show some little sidelines. So AB, AB, c3, d6, d4, bishop b6, knight a3, castles, and knight takes b5. So this is our starting position, the basic tabia of the Neo-Archangelsk, at least as played nowadays. So going back to this position, though, c3 is also a very common move order choice, and after d6, a4, you end up in the same thing. Black could play bishop to b7, after which white could choose either d4, which would transpose, or, well, it reaches a position that can arise via either the Archangelsk or Neo-Archangelsk move orders. So here, too, you might choose the move d3, although it's a little bit rarer with white having played c3. It's not quite as potent as the other version, which is yet another reason to maybe play a4 at this point. Well, at this moment. Okay, also after c3, d6, white can also play d4, bishop b6, and alright, first of all, let me mention, let me go back to this first. So a4, so I mentioned bishop to b7, but of course rook to b8, and then we're back on the road to our main line. And here white can either play knight a3 first, or just make the capture and get it over with and play knight a3. Alright, so back to here, and c3, d6, and now d4. So after bishop to b6, again a4 can be played, and here rook to b8 will again almost surely transpose to our main line, but here bishop to b7 can be played instead, and we've reached again this position that can arise via either the Archangelsk or Neo-Archangelsk move orders. Alright, instead of a4, white might think he can win something with this. D takes e5, knight e5, takes, and then bishop takes f7. But this, in fact, doesn't succeed, because after rook to f8, not knight takes e4, of course, because of bishop to d5, but rook f8. And next, black will play knight takes e4, because then there are various captures on f2. So bishop to d5 is the principal try, but takes, and bishop to b7, and black regains his pawn without any problems. The big point being that white doesn't have time really to play rook to d1 because his f2 pawn would hang. So black is doing swimmingly here. Alright, so that's all I wanted to say by way of these little sidelines here. So a4, rook b8, takes, c3, d6, d4, bishop b6, and here we are at our starting position. Well, black has three options here, but really we're going to focus very heavily on bishop to g4. The first option is really not an option, but it's just something that should be said, and that's that knight takes e4 is bad. Now, there are positions where this can be played, in particular after black is swapped on d4, because then, well, here bishop to d5 simply wins, but with the e-pawn gone, queen to e8 protects both knights simultaneously. So there are positions like that where it's playable. Here, we don't have one of them. All right, so let's look at e takes d4. And this is also a move that has more or less disappeared. So let me append a dubious sign to this one. C takes d4, bishop g4. So this was popular in the early to mid-2000s, but now it's just about gone. White has a lot of good ways to proceed, and so I'll mention a number of these. Well, first of all, there's an old USCL game that I covered on here back when I was doing the Game of the Day videos back in 2007 or 8. Well, the game I think was in 2007. Maybe the video was done in 2008. I'm not sure. Anyway, that was a game between Marcel Martinez and Dmitry Zilberstein, and that went like this: bishop to e3, knight e4, queen c2, queen e8. So there you see what I was just referring to. Bishop a4, bishop to d7, knight c3. And here Zilberstein played knight f6 and got, well, just got his head handed to him, but in really beautiful style. So Martinez had done some very deep preparation and won a really very nice game. And you know, I'd heartily recommend for you guys to look that game up if you're interested. Certainly, you can find it, you know, in the databases, and if you're, you know, if you're subscribers to the archive, however that works, you can certainly check it out in there as well. But anyway, since then though, knight takes c3 is taken over, and after bc knight e7 c4, white may be a little bit more comfortable, but you know, it's not a crushing advantage. I mean, black is maybe a little bit worse. But nothing fatal, and it's not really as risky a position for black as it is after Zilberstein's knight f6. Okay, so all that to say that bishop to e3 here probably gives white some edge, but you know, nothing crushing yet. All right, Viswanathan Anand played rook to e1 against Murtaz Kashgaleyev. It's a low 2600 GM in a 2006 game that he won. So that's a playable option, certainly. There's also bishop to a4, which I would consider the main move, and Topalov faced this twice, once against Kramnik, next against Leko, both in the Monte Carlo Melody Amber tournament in rapid games in 2004 first, and then 2005. So here he played d5 against Kramnik in 2004, changed his mind for the next year and played bishop takes f3. But even so, after g takes f3, he was still a bit worse, and Leko beat him that time as well. So the Kramnik game went d5, e5, knight e4, bishop e3, f6, queen c2, knight b4, and now queen to b3. And Kramnik has succeeded really in mislocating the black pieces. And now knight to d2 is good. And after c6, knight a7 left Kramnik with a clear advantage, which he converted in another 10 moves. And since it's only 10 more moves, why not? I'll show you how the game finished. So he's managed to really completely neutralize black's counterplay. He still just got his extra pawn. And after queen a3, he's not only threatening the c6 pawn in its own right, but the queen and rook are lined up against the bishop on a5, so there's that as well. So Topalov had nothing better than to go for these exchanges and then to play bishop to b4. But he's still basically just down a pawn for nothing, and the d5 pawn is weak too. And so that was a nice little finesse there. And here, white simply up 2 pawns. Let's make it 3 pawns. And here, Topalov resigned. Okay, so bishop to a4 looks like an effective move. It's probably not the only effective move, but seems to be good enough. So e takes d4, as I said, has disappeared. So bishop to g4 is really the big move. And now white has tried all kinds of things, generally with pretty good results too. All right, so first of all, bishop to e3. Well, after ed, cd, this transposes to the Martinez-Zilberstein game. So white probably has a little bit of an edge, but with best play, maybe it's nothing too too terrifying. All right, rook to e1 is another important option. This has been played quite a few times. Takes, knight h5, king h1. You'll see that idea very frequently, especially after black plays knight h5. It gets the king, of course, to a slightly safer square while clearing the g file for white's own attacking ambitions. So queen f6, rook g1, and all right, here maybe knight f4 is best, although e takes d4 I think has been tried the most. So knight f4, and then here bishop takes f4 was played in a game between Ho Yifan against Caruana in New Delhi in 2011. And I think, though, after bishop f4, queen f4, black is equal. And Caruana went on to win that game. All right, so bishop to e3 I think is the better choice. And white may be slightly better here. Black has tried a whole host of moves, including knight to e6, knight e7 with the idea of bringing the second knight to g6, knight to d8 with the idea of bringing the knight to e6, the second knight, and also king h8 getting off of the bishop's diagonal from b3 and the rook's attacking possibilities on the g file. So lots of options there. I'll cover e takes d4 a bit more thoroughly though. So after this, bishop to g5, queen e5, bishop d5, dc, and this of course is leading to great complications. So after bishop c6, cb, rook b1, bishop f2, rook g2, we have a position where white has a piece for 3 pawns. The pawns are kind of scattered, but the b pawn is of course quite useful, and white's pieces look a little bit clumsy as well. So rook to b6 is of course an immediate attempt to take advantage of this. Now from here there have been a large, well, no, not a large number, but there have been a number of really high level games. Now we'll look at 2 moves here. Rook takes f2 and bishop to d7. Alright, so bishop to d7 has been played in some important games. And now after bishop to c5, 2 moves to show you. So one game between Jan Smeets and Alexei Shirov from Vaikanze in 2011 saw knight to a7, and then Shirov played rook to a8 and lost just about immediately. Knight c6, takes, and he gave up. So he's down a rook for 3 pawns, and the problem is he doesn't really have any way of kind of knocking this out. Maybe he thought he had rook to a1 here, but it seems that rook g takes b2, queen takes b2, rook a1 should be fine. And he can't play queen takes g5 because there's rook to b8 mate. So it looks like a simple blunder. So what he should have done was played h6, creating luft, and after bishop to h4, of course the bishop's not hanging on g5 anymore, but the luft issue is important. And now d5 is a good move, clearing the path for the rook to swing over and discover an attack on the knight on a7. Anyway, it's a very unclear position. Maybe white still has something minor, but nothing too dramatic. So at any rate, later in the tournament, in the same event, white varied in the game Nepomniachtchi against Shirov. And so Nepomniachtchi played queen to c2. And the players raced, believe it or not, so this is move 23, where this novelty was played, and the players basically raced all the way to move 42. So they were still in their preparation there. So it went like this: h6, takes, queen f6, bishop g7, knight g7, knight c7. And now material is even, but, well, black goes up a pawn with this. Knight to d5, hitting the rook, rook b3, bishop a4, rook b7, bishop c6, rook b3, queen d2, threatening, of course, to do all kinds of despotic things in the area of the black king. So bishop to e3 prevents the white queen from getting to g5 or h6. Takes, and queen d6. Again, aiming, well, one threat is not really here because the queen covers g1, but in some positions, rook takes g7 and then rook to g1 could be played. Not yet, though. So rook to c3, threatening rook c1, rook b to g1, and now the only move, but it's sufficient, is queen g1, and then rook to c1. Alright, so more exchanges transpire, and now rook to c8. The bishop can't move because of rook to c1 check, so white has to give up the bishop to eliminate the b pawn. Alright, rook to g6. And yeah, through here the players were just racing Still, they were in their prep by this point, and it seems that black's fortress is secure. So, of course, black has no winning chances here, and white gets to kind of poke and prod, and he did for another 37 moves before finally giving up and allowing that the game would be a draw. So that's some pretty deep preparation, and it seems, at least through the moment, that it holds up. Black is, of course, playing for nothing more than a draw, but if you can draw, then terrific, you draw. Anyway, instead of bishop to d7, as in the games we just saw, rook takes f2 is still another try, and maybe a more promising one for white. Okay, from here, there's a game, high-level game, where black played queen takes g5. This was Leko against Caruana from XXV in 2010. So rook takes c6 might be possible as well, but it looks like white maintains some pull in any case. So queen g5, rook c2. Again, maybe rook takes c6 could be played. Rook c6, queen takes b5, rook c2, followed by rounding up the b pawn. And white has maybe a very small edge. I mean, he's got the exchange for a couple of pawns, but black's knight is not, well, it's not terrible. I mean, it could end up on f4, but in general, the black pawns don't seem to be too big of a threat. So maybe white has a very small something, but not a lot. Anyway, in the game, Caruana played knight to f4 instead of rook takes c6, and the game went queen f1, d5, takes, knight takes, takes, and rook c takes b2. And again, it needs to be said that white is slightly better, so he's got the exchange for a pawn. His kingside position, or his kingside structure, pardon me, is not fantastic, but there really aren't any easy targets. I mean, f3 can be easily defended, h2 is very easily defended, and the rook on b2, for instance, covers h2 and could go to the g file. So white is really solid enough. And Leko did go on to win this game. Okay, not that he's winning here, but it's an advantage that he can use, and he did. All right, so all of that to say then that rook to e1 is a very important move, and again, we saw that there are at least 4 distinct important lines in this setup, or 3, I should say. So again, bishop takes, so we get to here, and knight f4 as played in the Hu Yifan Caruana game is important. Bishop to e3 I think is best, and and instead of knight f4 there's e takes d4. We get to this position, and then there's either bishop to d7 as played in the 2 Shirov games from 2011, or rook takes f2. So in all these lines, again, white seems to have a little bit of a pull. Black should probably be able to hold, but it's not fun and maybe requires a pretty high level of defensive technique. A third move is d5, and this was used, for instance, in that same XXV tournament in 2011 by Nakamura against Shirov. Here, knight to e7 is the main option, and there are plenty of games with this. You can go and do some research on it if you like. I'll note that knight takes e4 has been played a few times. Not too many, but it's interesting. So dc, here the most accurate way for black to take on f2 is with the bishop, because if he takes with the knight, queen to c2 can actually be played, surprisingly enough. So it's a tricky little idea. So bishop f2 is best, rook takes f2. And of course, white could play rook f2 against bishop takes f2, or knight takes f2 as well. So anyway, we get to this, and then rook takes b5. And here, I think white's gone to like 3-1 with the move bishop to d5. It's got some plus. I don't remember what the exact score was. And he's better there. The computer likes bishop to c2. Either way, it's clear that white has some advantage with the 2 minor pieces against the rook and pawn. All right, so d5 is playable. As I said, knight to e7 is probably the most solid try. Knight takes e4 is interesting, but probably slightly dubious. All right, so finally we'll get to our main move here, and that's bishop to c2. So instead of bishop e3, rook e1 or d5. Okay, so from here, the following is again pretty typical. ed, knight b takes d4. White can play cd. This is also a possibility. And this might end up transposing to variations that we saw before, where black played e takes d4 earlier, but perhaps black has some extra finesses there. So this is another important line. Maybe I should have covered it, but too bad. No, not to be flippant, but I mean, there are a lot of possibilities. I think I've covered a really a significant number of them. But this is also a line that should be examined too if you're going to play the system very seriously. But it looks like knight b takes d4 is doing pretty well for white as well. So this is satisfactory if you're white, and if you're black, you do need to have something against both moves. All right, so knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, and knight h5. So we've seen all of this already. The main move, as before, was king to h1, although rook to a4 has been tried a few times, but without delivering much by way of results. So king h1, queen f6, bishop e3. And the first time this was played, which was, well, actually, yeah, the first time going back here, I think the bishop to g4 was played, maybe, was in an old Adams-Lecco game, match game from 2005. But, oh no, sorry, knight h5, yeah. So this, this position, this goes back to an Adams-Lecco match game in 2005. And then in that stem game, instead of rook to a8, Lecco played knight to f4, which was well met by rook to a4 here, and Adams went on to win. So nowadays, everybody plays rook a8 here. Threatening, rook takes a1, and then queen f3 with at least a perpetual check draw. Maybe there's more. Maybe black can play bishop takes d4 with the idea that bishop takes d4, knight f4 forces mate. Anyway, white doesn't allow this. I've seen white play, I think, rook a3, rook a4 here, but the main move is rook takes a8, rook a8. And now the best move here is probably rook to g1, but there's at least a tricky line you might be interested in, and that's with f4. So this threatens the knight, and of course if black doesn't take the pawn, I mean he has a pawn down right now, and if he doesn't take this, then white is just going to play e5 or f5 and steamroll black off the board. So got to take it, and now e5 takes, and now queen f3, and black threatens, or white threatens, pardon me, both queen takes a8, winning everything and forcing mate, and also to play d takes e5 followed by capturing the knight on f4. So what is black to do? He's only got one move, and that's queen d8. So the queen protects the rook and gets out of the way of d takes e5. So white can play de here, but it seems that after either knight e6, suggested by Michalewski in chesspublishing.com is what I'm referring to, or knight to g6 is played in a game between Szabo, the new Szabo, not the old deceased candidate Laszlo Szabo. So Szabo against Kovacevic in Hungary in 2008. So that one continued. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and black should probably hold here. I mean, white maybe has a very, very small edge, but black is okay. He's equal, and the game ended up as a draw. So f4 is tricky, but doesn't promise an advantage. So rook to g1 has been played in a number of games and may in fact offer white a pull. So knight f4, bishop to b3. Okay, here g6 was played. Michalewski mentions as another possibility. I think he suggests that it's an improvement. I don't think I agree, but it's certainly a playable option. Knight to e6. So now bishop to d5, rook b8, and bishop takes e6. And it looks like white is pretty secure. I mean, black always is going to have some chances because b2 might prove a little bit loose, and f3 is always going to need a little bit of watching as well. But it looks like white maintains some edge here. All right, and maybe Michalewski feels that just those, if black can avoid any immediate tactical troubles, the defects in white's structure will give black reasonable drawing chances. And that may in fact be correct. Anyway, g6 was played by Caruana in a couple of games. So the first one was Alexeyev against Caruana in Khanty-Mansiysk in 2009. I guess that was probably a World Cup. And there, Alexeyev played rook to g4, and the game wound up drawn a bit later. So knight e6, takes, rook to g1, which is not terribly inspiring, rook a2, queen d2, queen h3, and already you can see the draw shaping up. With rook to g3, then queen f1 check forces the rook back to g1, and so that's just going to be a repetition. While queen to e2 is played by Alexeyev, allows black to force an immediate draw. I bet you all see how. Rook takes b2. And if white doesn't take, then black is doing really well. So there's certainly nothing to be gained by not taking. So he just took, and a handshake ensued at this point. Well, instead of Alexeyev's rook to g4, which clearly didn't amount to much of anything, e5 is a much better choice. This was played by Krivoruchko against Caruana earlier this year, that being 2012. So that game continued like this. So d takes e5. I think it was 2012. Anyway, d e5. And now one tactical point is that if queen takes e5, then white has bishop takes f7 check, with the point being that if king f7, white takes the knight, and black cannot recapture because queen d5 check, and then white picks up the rook. And of course, with the queen covering f3, there's no perpetual. All right, so instead of king takes f7, black should probably play king h8, and still, though, white has an edge after queen to d2. So instead of queen takes e5, Caruana played queen f5, but guess what? Same trick, bishop takes f7 check. So if king takes f7, then again bishop f4, and if queen f4, queen d5 is what we just saw. Bishop takes f2 is a better option for black, but still, after queen d5 check, rook to d1, rook f8, queen d7, king back takes, and e6, as pointed out by Michalewski in every computer, white is clearly better. So it's I would say white is still a ways from winning this, but his extra pawn means something here. Okay, so king f7 is not the best way to go. Instead, queen takes f7 is a better choice. And here, white's still up a pawn, but yeah, the material is limited. White's king side is not so fantastic, and I would say black has pretty reasonable chances to hold here. But obviously, it still is white who's better thanks to the extra material. The burden of proof is always on black in these lines. Well, Caruana played king to g7, and here Krivoruchko played bishop to d5, which wasn't as accurate, and Caruana could have maybe held, but anyway, Krivoruchko did go on to win even after this. But the best move was bishop to b3, keeping this bishop alive. Now, if rook to b8, then bishop c2, and again, black can take, but white is happy. Queen d7 check, and now bishop to d2 is a very strong move, threatening to just win on the spot with bishop to c3. So bishop d4, now queen f7, threatening to take on f4, and now rook e1 with all kinds of mating possibilities lurking about with rook e8 or rook e7. The loss of the f2 pawn, even with check, means basically nothing here. So black is simply lost, I believe, after rook to b8. Alright, so knight h3 is a better choice. Rook to g2, covering f2, and for that matter also pre-blocking any queen takes f3 check ideas, although white still has to be careful about the rook on a8 going to a1. Anyway, takes, queen e5, and here both rook e2 and queen d7 check, followed by bishop to d1. So this one is me. This line is Michalewski, so he gives bishop to d1, which again the computer spits out too. Rook a1, rook c2, knight g5, king g2. And in both cases, white has an extra pawn, has neutralized black's more dangerous possibilities, and maybe isn't winning, but is certainly clearly better. All right, so this I think is enough to give you guys a really good overview of the Neo-Archangelsk in some of its most important contemporary interpretations. It looks like black is having some trouble at the moment in this system. So certainly it's not going to be refuted. I'm sure that players like Caruana and Shirov will certainly manage to keep the torch burning. But as I said, for the moment at least, it doesn't seem that black is doing especially well in either the classic or the Neo versions of the Archangelsk variation. All right, well, so that'll do it for those systems, and we'll keep progressing on our way to the modern main lines, or the classic main lines, I should say. So the Marshall is yet to come. Again, the main lines that come after 9h3 are yet to come. I think I've still got Queen E2 variations to look at. So that might be next. And yeah, that might be next. So it might be Queen E2, marshals and anti-marshals, and then the main line systems, including both the traditional lines and some of the gambit lines by players like Gajewski or Gajewski. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. But anyway, so that's all yet to come. But we are done with the Archangelsk. And I think, as I said, Queen E2 systems will be next up on the agenda. So I'll see you then. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.